The bustling streets of the Andes marketplace were filled with vibrant colors, strange scents, and the murmur of countless alien tongues. Creatures from every corner of the galaxy gathered here, trading everything from rare minerals to exotic pets. In the farthest, most neglected corner of the market, a massive creature lay curled up on the cold metal floor, ignored by nearly everyone who passed by. Grim was his name, or at least, that's what the merchant who had tried and failed to sell him called him. He was a Korean hound, a breed bred for war, known for their immense size, strength, and fierce loyalty. But Grim was different. His fur was patchy and rough, his right leg twisted slightly from a birth defect. And his face was scarred, not from battle, but from the cruel mockery of those who found him too ugly to be worth keeping. He had been abandoned by his previous owners, a noble alien family who couldn't bear the shame of parading around an imperfect pet. And so, Grim was left to fend for himself in the overcrowded marketplace, fed scraps by a reluctant merchant who only kept him alive in the hope that some desperate buyer might one day take pity on him. But no one did. Day after day, the alien visitors and traders passed by, casting disgusted glances or wide-eyed stares at the hulking, sad-eyed creature. His once vibrant blue eyes had dulled with resignation. He was unwanted, a burden, a mistake, left in the forgotten corners of the galaxy. And then, one day, everything changed. Sergeant Jack Harper strolled through the market, his human features standing out among the mix of alien races. He was a soldier stationed on Rendis, a veteran of countless off-world campaigns with a reputation for being tough, no-nonsense, and focused on duty. He was known for his sharp mind, but he rarely revealed the heart that lay beneath his rugged exterior. Jack had been making his rounds, inspecting the markets for potential threats or illegal dealings, when his eyes landed on the massive creature lying in the shadows. The sight of Grim stopped him in his tracks. "Poor thing," Jack muttered under his breath as he took in the creature's scarred face and forlorn expression. Unlike the others who had passed by, Jack didn't see something to be scorned. He saw something else, a reflection of himself. Grim, like him, had been cast aside, deemed unworthy in a galaxy that valued perfection over heart. Jack crouched down, slowly approaching Grim, careful not to startle the massive hound. Grim's ears perked up, but he didn't move. His dull eyes tracked Jack's movements, waiting for the inevitable sneer or condescending pat before the human would move on like all the others. But Jack didn't. He reached into his pack and pulled out a piece of dried meat from his rations, holding it out toward Grim. The hound hesitated for a moment, sniffing the air cautiously before inching forward and taking the meat from Jack's hand. It was the first kindness Grim had experienced in months. "You're not ugly, big guy," Jack said softly, patting Grim's rough head. "You're just a little beat up, same as the rest of us." Grim, feeling the warmth of Jack's touch, let out a low, contented rumble. For the first time in ages, he didn't feel like an outcast. He didn't feel unwanted. Jack stood up, giving Grim one last look before heading back to his patrol. But as he walked away, something tugged at him, pulling him back toward the hound. He couldn't shake the feeling that this creature, abandoned by the galaxy, deserved more. Jack had seen too many lives wasted, too many soldiers thrown away after their usefulness had run out. Grim was no different, a warrior cast aside because he no longer fit someone's ideal. Jack turned back, determination in his eyes. "Let's get you out of here." Jack returned to the market the next day, his decision made. He was going to adopt Grim, no matter what. Superiors or the other soldiers said the creature deserved a second chance, just like any soldier returning from the battlefield. Jack approached the merchant, who had been half-heartedly caring for Grim. The alien looked up from his stall, his eyes widening in surprise as he saw Jack standing there with a determined look on his face. "I want him," Jack said, his voice steady. The merchant blinked in disbelief. "Him? You mean Grim, the ugly one?" Jack's jaw tightened. "Yeah, the ugly one. How much?" The merchant scratched his head, clearly unsure how to price a creature he had given up on selling. Well, I guess if you really want him, I'll let him go for 50 credits." Jack nodded and transferred the credits to the merchant without hesitation. As the transaction went through, the merchant sighed with relief, happy to finally be rid of the beast. He motioned for one of his workers to bring over Grim's chain. But as the worker approached, Grim growled low in his throat, his massive form stiffening with tension. The worker froze, clearly afraid of the hound's size and reputation. Jack stepped forward, holding up a hand. "No need for that. He's coming with me, no chains." The merchant and his worker exchanged doubtful looks, but Jack wasn't about to let them treat Grim like an animal anymore. He knelt down in front of the hound, meeting his eyes with a calm, steady gaze. "Come on, big guy," Jack said softly. "You're free now." Grim hesitated, unsure if this was real, if this human could really be offering him freedom after months of neglect and rejection. But then something in Jack's voice, something genuine, reassured him. Slowly, Grim stood up, towering over Jack but moving with surprising gentleness. He padded over to the human, his head held low as if still expecting rejection. But Jack reached out, placing a hand on Grim's rough fur. "Good boy," Jack murmured. "Let's get out of here." The two of them walked side by side through the market, drawing astonished stares from the aliens and merchants who had once mocked Grim. But Jack didn't care. Grim wasn't just some ugly creature anymore. He was Jack's companion, his friend. As they left the market behind, Jack glanced down at Grim, a small smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "You're not ugly, Grim. You're just misunderstood, and from now on, you've got someone who understands you." For the first time in months, Grim felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. And as they made their way toward Jack's barracks, Grim knew that his days of being unwanted were finally over. Jack and Grim walked through the winding corridors of the military base, the hound's enormous frame barely fitting through the doors. Soldiers and personnel stopped in their tracks, staring at the unlikely duo, many with expressions of surprise, others with a mixture of fear and disgust. Grim was used to the looks, but with Jack at his side, he felt a strange sense of calm. For once, the stares didn't hurt as much. As they entered Jack's quarters, Grim hesitated at the threshold, unsure if he was truly welcome inside. Jack noticed the hesitation and knelt beside him, patting the hound's massive head reassuringly. "Come on, big guy," Jack said with a grin. "This is your home now, too." Grim stepped inside, his claws clicking softly against the floor. The quarters were modest, a far cry from the grand homes of the aliens who had abandoned him. But to Grim, it felt like the first real home he'd ever had. Jack grabbed a spare blanket, laying it on the floor beside his bunk. "I'm guessing you're more of a floor kind of guy," he said, his tone light. Grim sniffed the blanket, then curled up on it, his large body taking up most of the space. He let out a deep, contented breath as he settled in. Jack sat on the edge of his bunk, watching Grim with a sense of satisfaction. For years, Jack had been a solitary figure, dedicated to his duties as a soldier, but disconnected from the world around him. He'd seen too much loss, too much senseless violence, and it had hardened him, made him wary of getting close to anyone or anything. But Grim was different. Jack saw in the hound a reflection of his own struggles. Grim had been discarded, rejected for something beyond his control, just as Jack had been scarred by battles and forced to fight wars that weren't his own. In Grim, Jack found a kindred spirit. And for the first time in years, he felt the stirrings of a connection he hadn't known he needed. As the night settled in, Jack glanced at the hound, now snoring softly beside him. He smiled, shaking his head in disbelief at how quickly Grim had become part of his life. "Looks like it's you and me now, buddy," Jack muttered, his voice soft in the quiet room. "Hope you're ready for this." The base had its rules, and Jack knew adopting a Korean hound was bound to raise questions. But rules had never stopped him before. Grim deserved a second chance, and Jack was determined to give it to him, no matter what. The next morning, Jack took Grim out for a walk around the base, knowing full well that they would face scrutiny from his fellow soldiers. As expected, the moment they stepped outside, heads turned and whispers began circulating. Some soldiers stepped aside cautiously as Grim passed, clearly unnerved by the eyes and reputation of the beast. Others simply stared, eyes wide with disbelief. One of Jack's squadmates, Lieutenant Reese, spotted them and jogged over with a grin. Reese was one of the few soldiers who didn't take things too seriously, often finding humor in the most unexpected situations. Well, Harper," Reese said, his voice teasing. "Didn't take you for a dog person, and this is a big dog." He gave Grim a wary once-over but kept a respectful distance. Jack smirked. Not just any dog, Reese. His name's Grim, and he's a Korean hound. Reese raised an eyebrow. A Korean hound? Aren't those war beasts? You sure you're not going soft on us? Jack chuckled. Grim's more than just a war beast. He's a survivor, like the rest of us. Reese shook his head, still grinning. Well, I hope he's as loyal as you think, Harper. Wouldn't want to be around if he decides to chew someone's arm off. Jack gave Grim a reassuring pat. He's got a good heart. He's not hurting anyone, unless I tell him to. But as the morning went on, it became clear that not everyone shared Reese's easygoing attitude. Grim's presence unsettled many of the soldiers, and it didn't take long before Jack was called into the commanding officer's office. Colonel Varan, an alien of the Thren species, sat behind his desk, his stern reptilian face fixed in a frown as Jack entered the room. Sergeant Harper, Varan began, his voice cold. I've received multiple reports about your companion. You've brought a Korean hound onto this base without clearance. That's highly irregular. Jack stood at attention, his expression calm but resolute. With all due respect, sir, Grim isn't a threat. I've been trained, and I'm responsible for him. He's not going to cause any trouble. Ven's yellow eyes narrowed. Korean hounds are not pets, Sergeant. They are war creatures, bred for battle. What happens when that thing's instincts take over? Jack met the colonel's gaze steadily. He's not just a thing, sir. Grim was abandoned, neglected because of how he looks. I've trained him, and he's loyal to me. I trust him with my life. There was a long pause as Vaughn considered Jack's words. You've always been a good soldier, Harper, Farron said, his tone softening slightly. But this isn't just about you. There are concerns about the safety of the others on this base. Jack nodded, understanding the hesitation. I'll keep Grim under control. If anything happens, I'll take full responsibility. But I'm asking you to give him a chance, just like I would for any soldier in my unit. Ven leaned back in his chair, his reptilian eyes searching Jack's face for signs of doubt. After a tense moment, he sighed. Fine, but who's your responsibility, Sergeant? Any incidents, and Hune is off this base. Understood? Jack saluted sharply. Understood, sir. As Jack left the office, a sense of relief washed over him. He knew Grim would prove himself, just as he had. The real challenge now was showing the rest of the soldiers that the massive hound wasn't a monster, but a companion worth fighting for. Later that day, as Jack returned to his quarters with Grim in tow, Reese approached again, this time with a couple of other squad mates who were curious about the hound. So, Harper, Reese said, giving Grim a cautious glance. How's he holding up? Jack smiled, patting Grim's head. He's doing just fine. One of the other soldiers, a young recruit named Davis, took a tentative step forward, eyeing Grim nervously. Can I pet him? Jack nodded, keeping a watchful eye on Grim. Go ahead, he won't bite. Davis hesitated before reaching out his hand, trembling slightly. Grim sniffed his hand before nudging it with his massive head, a soft rumble of contentment escaping his throat. The tension in the air eased as Davis broke into a smile. Hune's not so bad, Davis said, his voice filled with surprise. Jack chuckled. Told you. He's got a heart under all that muscle. As the soldiers gathered around, curiosity overtaking their fear, Jack watched with pride as Grim accepted their tentative touches and praise. He had come a long way from the unwanted creature in the market. Now, with Jack by his side, Grim was beginning to find his place, not just in Jack's life, but in the hearts of those around him. The weeks that followed saw Grim slowly becoming a familiar presence on the military base. Though there were still whispers and wary glances, many of the soldiers grew more comfortable with the hulking Korathon hound. Jack had trained him well, and Grim's loyalty to Jack was undeniable. The once abandoned creature had transformed from a misunderstood beast to a valued member of the unit. But not everyone was convinced of Grim's place. One evening, while the base was in the middle of a routine training exercise, an incident occurred that would test everything Jack had worked for. The exercise involved simulated combat drills, with soldiers practicing under the threat of mock attacks. Explosions, smoke, and blaster fire filled the air as the troops moved through the drills. Jack was in the command center, overseeing the exercise, while Grim rested by his side. The sounds of battle didn't faze the hound, as he had grown used to the chaos of military life. But then something unexpected happened. a group of younger recruits, jittery and inexperienced, stumbled into a part of the drill they hadn't been prepared for. The sounds of gunfire became too real for them, and in their panic, one of the soldiers, Davis, tripped and accidentally triggered a live grenade. The explosion was small, but enough to send the recruits into a full-blown panic. One soldier froze, his eyes wide with fear, while Davis tried to drag him to safety. But before anyone could act, another grenade was thrown toward the recruits by mistake, landing just feet away from the terrified soldiers. Everything slowed in that moment. The grenade's fuse was short, ticking down quickly. Jack's heart leaped into his throat as he realized there was no time to pull the recruits back. His instincts screamed at him to move, but before he could, Grim was already in motion. The massive hound bolted across the field with incredible speed, covering the distance between the grenade and the recruits in seconds. Jack could only watch as Grim leapt into the air, throwing his body over the live grenade just as it detonated. The explosion sent a wave of smoke and debris into the air, knocking the nearby soldiers to the ground. For a brief moment, there was silence. Jack's heart pounded in his chest as he ran toward the scene, with his mind racing with fear for Grim's safety. When the smoke cleared, Jack found Grim lying in the dirt, his massive body shielding the young recruits from the blast. The hound was battered, his fur singed, but he was alive, groaning in pain, but still breathing. The recruits, wide-eyed and trembling, stared at the creature that had saved their lives. "Grim," Jack shouted, kneeling beside the hound, his hands trembling as he examined Grim's injuries. There was a deep wound on Grim's side, but it wasn't fatal. The hound looked up at Jack, his blue eyes filled with loyalty and relief, as if he was glad to see Jack was unharmed. "Good boy," Jack whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "You did good, buddy." The recruits gathered around, their expressions filled with awe and guilt. Davis, the one who had thrown the grenade by mistake, knelt beside Grim, his voice shaking. "I'm sorry," he stammered. I didn't mean to." Jack shook his head, his hand resting gently on Grim's head. "It's okay, Davis." Grim knew what he was doing. Word of Grim's heroic act spread quickly through the base, and by the end of the day, the hound was being hailed as a hero. Even Colonel Venn, who had once questioned Grim's place on the base, personally came to Jack's quarters to check on the hound. "I heard about what happened," Venn said, his reptilian features betraying none of his usual sternness. "It seems I underestimated your companion." Jack looked up from where he was sitting beside Grim, who was resting on his blanket, bandaged but healing. "He saved those recruits' lives," Jack said quietly. "No hesitation. He didn't think about himself, just them." Vaughn nodded, his yellow eyes lingering on Grim. "Loyalty like that is rare. You were right to trust him." Jack gave a small smile, his hand gently stroking Grim's fur. "He's part of the team, sir. Always has been." Venn's gaze softened just slightly. "Keep him close, Sergeant. He's earned his place." In the days that followed Grim's heroic act, the base seemed to settle into a new rhythm. Grim was no longer just an oddity or a pet. He was a valued part of the unit. Soldiers who had once kept their distance now sought him out, offering treats and pats on the head. Even the most skeptical among them had to admit that Grim had proven himself worthy of their respect. But just as things seemed to be settling down, an unexpected threat loomed on the horizon. One night, while the base was quiet and most of the soldiers were off duty, the alarms blared to life. Jack, who had been resting in his quarters, leaped out of bed, his instincts immediately kicking in. Grim, who had been dozing at the foot of Jack's bunk, was on his feet in an instant, his ears pricked and his body tense. Jack rushed to the command center, his mind racing with possibilities. The base had been peaceful for months. There hadn't been any signs of an imminent threat. But as Jack arrived at the command center, the news hit him like a punch to the gut. An enemy force, previously thought to be defeated, had resurfaced and was launching an attack on the base. The attackers, a band of rogue mercenaries, had somehow breached the outer perimeter and were making their way toward the heart of the base. "Get everyone to defensive positions," Jack shouted, grabbing his blaster from the rack. "We can't let them reach the command center." As soldiers scrambled to defend the base, Grim stayed close to Jack's side, his massive form a reassuring presence. The bond between them had grown even stronger after the grenade incident, and Jack knew, without a doubt, that Grim would fight to the death to protect him and the others. The first wave of mercenaries hit hard, their ships swooping down from the sky and unleashing a barrage of firepower on the base. Explosions lit up the night, and the sounds of blaster fire filled the air as the soldiers fought back with everything they had. Jack led a group of soldiers to the front line, his blaster firing in rapid bursts as they engaged the enemy. Grim was right beside him, tearing through the ranks of mercenaries with terrifying speed and precision. Despite his size, Grim moved with an agility that caught the enemy off guard, and his strength was unmatched. As the battle raged on, Jack caught sight of a group of mercenaries attempting to flank them, moving toward an unguarded part of the base. His heart raced. If they breached the command center, they could disable the base's defenses and leave everyone vulnerable. Without hesitation, Jack whistled sharply, signaling to Grim. The hound's ears twitched, and within seconds, he was sprinting toward the flanking group, his massive paws pounding against the ground. Jack followed close behind, his blaster at the ready. When Grim reached the mercenaries, they barely had time to react. With a snarl, Grim leapt into the fray, his powerful jaws clamping down on one of the attackers, while his claws sent another sprawling. Jack fired off precise shots, taking down the rest of the group with grim efficiency. But as they fought, Jack saw something that made his blood run cold. Another wave of mercenaries, this one much larger, was closing in fast. There were too many of them for Jack and Grim to handle alone. "Fall back!" Jack shouted, his voice strained as he fired at the advancing enemy. "We need reinforcements." Grim let out a low growl, standing his ground beside Jack as the mercenaries closed in. But Jack knew they couldn't hold the line much longer. If they didn't retreat soon, they would be overrun. Just as Jack was about to signal for a full retreat, reinforcements arrived. A squad of soldiers, led by Reese, charged into the fray, their blasters blazing as they cut through the mercenaries. The tide of the battle turned in an instant, and within minutes, the enemy was forced into a full retreat. As the last of the mercenaries fled, Jack let out a breath of relief. The base was saved, but it had been a close call. He looked down at Grim, who was panting heavily but still standing tall. "You did it again, buddy," Jack said, his voice filled with pride. "You saved us." Grim let out a soft, contented rumble, his massive tail wagging as he leaned into Jack's side. The battle was over, but Jack knew one thing for certain. Grim had more than earned his place at the base. He wasn't just a companion or a protector. He was family. The aftermath. In the aftermath of the battle, the base was alive with activity. Soldiers were tending to the wounded, repairing damage to the fortifications, and securing any remaining mercenaries that had been captured during the fight. The mood was tense but triumphant. Against all odds, they had held their ground, and much of the credit went to Grim's bravery. As the sun began to rise over the base, casting long shadows across the courtyard, Jack sat with Grim on the edge of the command center steps. Grim, despite the grueling fight, was still at Jack's side, his wounds bandaged, but his spirit unbroken. Jack absently scratched behind Grim's ears, feeling the deep rumble of the hound's contentment. Colonel then approached, his reptilian features set in their usual stern expression, but there was something different in his eyes, a glint of respect. He stopped a few feet away, his gaze fixed on Grim. "Sergeant Harper?" Then began, his voice gruff but less formal than usual. "Word has spread about what happened last night. Grim's actions were commendable. It's rare to see such loyalty and bravery, especially in a creature once deemed unfit for service." Jack looked up, meeting the colonel's gaze. "Grim's more than proven himself, sir," he said firmly. "He saved lives again. He's earned his place here, more than any of us." Farron nodded slowly. "I agree. It seems I was wrong to question your decision to bring him aboard. The base owes Grim a great deal." He paused for a moment before continuing. "I'm recommending him for an official commendation along with the rest of your unit. His actions last night may have changed some minds, about Corian hounds and about the value of giving second chances." Jack felt a surge of pride, not for himself, but for Grim. "Thank you, sir," he said sincerely. "Grim's not just a soldier, he's part of the family." Then's eyes flicked to the hound, who was watching him with a calm, intelligent gaze. "It appears so," the colonel said. "See that he's well taken care of, Sergeant." With that, then turned and walked away, leaving Jack and Grim alone once again. Jack smiled down at Grim, who let out a contented huff, as if he understood the significance of what had just happened. "You hear that, buddy?" Jack murmured, running a hand over Grim's thick fur. "You're a hero now," he chuckled softly. "Not bad for the ugly hound, huh?" Grim nuzzled Jack's hand, his eyes half closed in a rare moment of peace. Jack couldn't help but feel that, in some small way, Grim had finally found redemption. Not just in the eyes of the soldiers around him, but in the galaxy that had once rejected him. In the weeks following the mercenary attack, life on the base returned to a relative calm. The soldiers continued their daily routines, but now there was a newfound respect for Grim, who had become a symbol of loyalty and courage. Wherever Jack went, Grim followed, his presence a reassuring reminder of the bond they had forged in the heat of battle. But it wasn't just the soldiers who had changed. Jack himself felt different. In the past, he had always been focused on his duty, keeping others at arm's length, afraid of letting anyone or anything get too close. But Grim had broken through those walls, showing Jack that trust and loyalty could be built, even in the most unexpected places. One afternoon, as Jack and Grim were making their rounds, they ran into Lieutenant Reese, who had just returned from a mission off base. Reese, always quick with a joke, grinned when he saw the two of them. "Well, if it isn't the galaxy's favorite duo," Reese teased. "You two planning to save the universe next?" Jack smirked. "Depends on what the universe throws at us." Reese knelt down, giving Grim a hearty pat on the side. "I've got to admit, Harper, I didn't think much of the big guy at first, but after what he did, well, let's just say I wouldn't want to be on the wrong side of him in a fight." Grim let out a low, approving rumble, his tail thumping against the ground. Reese stood up, his expression turning more serious. "You've got something special here, Jack. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." Jack nodded, grateful for the words. "I know, Reese. He's more than just a pet. He's family." Reese clapped Jack on the shoulder before heading off to his next assignment, leaving Jack and Grim alone once again. As they continued their patrol, Jack found himself reflecting on the journey they had taken together. From the market where Grim had been abandoned to the battlefield where he had proven his worth. It hadn't been easy, but they had come out stronger on the other side. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Jack and Grim sat on a hill overlooking the base. The sky was painted in shades of orange and pink, and the air was cool and still. Jack leaned back, his arms resting on the ground behind him, while Grim lay beside him, his head resting on Jack's lap. "You know," Jack said softly, his voice barely more than a whisper, "I never thought I'd find someone, or something, I could trust like this. I guess we're both a little rough around the edges, huh?" Grim lifted his head slightly, his blue eyes meeting Jack's. There was an understanding in the hound's gaze, a silent acknowledgement of the bond they shared. Jack smiled, his hand gently stroking Grim's fur. "I don't know what the future holds for us, but I do know one thing. You're stuck with me now, big guy, and I wouldn't have it any other way." As the stars began to twinkle in the sky above them, Jack felt a sense of peace he hadn't known in years. For the first time in a long while, he wasn't just a soldier with a duty. He was a man with a companion, a friend, and a bond that nothing in the galaxy could break. The peace wouldn't last. The quiet that Jack and Grim had come to cherish didn't last long. One evening, as the base settled into the stillness of the night, alarms blared across the compound, pulling Jack from his sleep. He scrambled out of bed, pulling on his uniform and grabbing his blaster. Grim was already awake, standing by the door with his ears perked and his muscles tense. Jack knew. Something was coming. Something was different this time. It wasn't a drill or a routine attack. This was something bigger. Something dangerous. As Jack and Grim rushed to the command center, the reality of the situation became clear. A large enemy fleet, far more organized than the mercenaries they had faced before, was approaching the planet. They were a rogue faction of the Galactic Alliance, once thought to be dismantled. But now they were rising again, and they were coming to take the base. Colonel Vaughn stood in the center of the war room, surrounded by maps and tactical screens, issuing orders with calm urgency. Jack approached, his heart pounding but his mind sharp and focused. "Sergeant Harper," Vaughn said, not looking up from the holodisplay. "We've got a full-scale invasion coming our way. We need every able body to defend the base. This is not a fight we can afford to lose." Jack nodded. "Grim and I are ready, sir." Vaughn's eyes flicked toward the Hound, who stood at Jack's side, alert, tense, and ready for battle. "Good. We'll need him. They're coming for the command center, and if we lose it, we lose the base." Vaughn turned back to the map, voice steady. "Get your unit to the western gate. That's where they'll hit first." Jack saluted, then turned to Grim, who gave a low growl of determination. Together they moved quickly to rally the squad, preparing for what would undoubtedly be the hardest battle they had ever faced. The battle begins. The skies above the base darkened as enemy ships descended. The first wave hit the western gate, just as Vaughn had predicted, and the battle erupted in a flash of gunfire and explosions. Jack and Grim fought side by side, moving through the chaos with practiced precision. Blaster fire illuminated the night, and the screams of soldiers, both ally and enemy, filled the air. The enemy was relentless. The battle dragged on into the night, wave after wave of enemy troops forcing Jack's unit to fight for every inch of ground. But through it all, Grim was a force of nature. He tackled enemies, shielded the wounded, and rallied the soldiers when their spirits faltered. His massive form moved with terrifying speed, his instincts honed to perfection. Yet despite their efforts, Jack could feel the tide turning against them. The enemy forces were too many, too well equipped. Slowly, they were being pushed back toward the command center. Jack's mind raced. They couldn't hold out much longer, and the enemy knew it. Then he saw him. The enemy commander stood at the center of the chaos, a towering figure in sleek black armor, directing the assault with cold efficiency. His movements were precise, his commands calculated. He was the key. If they could take him down, they might stand a chance. "Grim," Jack shouted over the battle, pointing toward the commander. "We need to take him down. Come on." With a fierce growl, Grim surged forward, tearing through enemy ranks like a storm given form. Jack followed close behind, his blaster firing as they cut a path toward their target. The commander turned as they approached, a chilling mechanical laugh echoing through his helmet. "You think you can stop me?" he sneered, drawing a sleek energy blade. "You're too late. Your base is lost." Jack wasn't listening. He and Grim charged together. The fight was brutal. The commander's blade flashed in the darkness, blocking Jack's shots and dodging Grim's powerful strikes with almost inhuman speed. But Grim was relentless, pressing forward, his sheer strength overwhelming the commander's defenses. Then, in a single moment of opportunity, Jack saw his opening. Grim lunged, knocking the commander off balance. Jack didn't hesitate. He fired a single, precise shot. The blast hit its mark. The commander crumpled to the ground, defeated. For a moment, the battlefield went quiet. The enemy forces, seeing their leader fall, hesitated. And in that hesitation, the rebels surged forward, pushing the invaders back. The tide had turned. The battle raged on for hours, but with their commander dead, the enemy's coordination shattered. By dawn, the last of the invaders had been driven from the base, their forces scattered in retreat. The base had held, but the cost had been high. Many soldiers lay wounded, some had fallen, their sacrifice paid in blood to keep their homes safe. Jack stood among the rubble, exhaustion settling deep into his bones. Beside him, Grim panted heavily. But he was still standing, still strong. They had done it. They had survived. A hero's recognition. As the morning sun rose over the battlefield, Colonel Vaughn approached. His usual stern demeanor had softened. He looked at Jack, then at Grim, and nodded. "You've saved us again, Harper," Vaughn said quietly. He glanced down at Grim. "And him. He's proven to be more than just a companion. He's saved this base more times than I can count." Jack smiled tiredly, patting Grim's side. "He's always been more than just a companion, sir. He's family." Vaughn nodded, his gaze lingering on the Hound. "The galaxy needs to hear about this. Grim's not just a hero here. He's a symbol of what we're fighting for. Second chances. Loyalty. The bond between man and beast." Jack felt a surge of pride as Vaughn continued. "I'll be recommending Grim for the highest honors we can give." He paused, then added, "And you, Harper, I'll be recommending you for a promotion. You led your unit with bravery and heart. This base owes you both its survival." Jack was about to respond when Grim suddenly leaned into him, nudging him with his massive head. Jack chuckled, scratching behind the Hound's ears. Looks like Grim doesn't care much about medals or promotions, he said with a grin. He's just happy we're all still standing. Vaughn allowed himself a rare smile. Then he straightened and saluted. You've earned it, Harper. Both of you. As Vaughn walked away, Jack knelt beside Grim, running his hand through the hound's thick fur. The battle was over, but their journey wasn't. They would continue to fight, continue to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. But for now, they could rest, knowing they had done something remarkable. Jack stood looking out at the rising sun, a sense of peace settling over him. He had always been a soldier, a man defined by duty. But Grim had changed something in him, had shown him the power of loyalty, of trust, of love, in a galaxy that so often forgot those things. Jack placed a hand on Grim's back, his voice soft. Come on, buddy, he said. Let's go home. Together, they walked back to the base, side by side. Grim's steps were slow, his body worn from the fight, but his head was held high. His loyalty, his courage, unquestionable. And as the sun continued to rise, casting its warm light over the base, Jack knew, no matter what the galaxy threw at them next, they would face it together.